All right, YouTube. California lawmakers want to decriminalize committing murder, essentially. They're proposing that they reduce the penalties involved for willfully and knowingly infecting others with HIV, with the reasoning that, oh, the HIV scare back in the 80s and 90s, well, it's no longer incurable. We can give people, antivirus sort of compounds, and they'll be fine. They'll be able to live a normal life, and we can reduce the viral load to below detectable levels, and they can't really spread it around and stuff. And so we shouldn't be scared of it. It's a terrible idea. I guess if you go to California, make sure you don't have sex with anyone if this sort of a proposal actually passes. And it is California, so let's face it, it's possible if they could do it there. Um, AIDS is a little bit different from, let's say, chlamydia or something like that. It's incurable and it's deadly. The fact that you can dispense drugs to people to prevent it from totally fucking them over doesn't mean that it can't potentially, in time, mutate into a form that those drugs don't work for, number one. Number two, what if there's a drug shortage? That could be a problem. Number three, why wouldn't a person, why would you say that a person doesn't have a right to see justice imparted to someone who has knowingly infected them with something that they're going to have to take these drugs for their whole life to begin with? It's essentially a life sentence to having to do that, and or a death sentence if they can't. So I would strongly oppose this. I think it's a terrible idea. It flies in the face of science. The fact that AIDS is not as transmissible as once thought. They used to think it was such a plague. Well, if you even come close to someone with AIDS, you're going to get AIDS. If you come into contact with any of their bodily fluids, you'll get AIDS. You'll probably get AIDS anyway. We're all going to die, basically. There was a scare period there, certainly in the late 80s. It continued when I was a kid. People were still terrified of it. We now know that it's not quite so easily transmissible. There are ways of generally preventing transmission. One of the big ways is, of course, using antiretrovirals, reduce the viral load, protected sex, and so forth. The problem being, it's still a lifelong condition to this day that we know of. There's still no ironclad guarantee in any of the cases where people have achieved technical remission that if they were to stop using those substances, that the viral load wouldn't immediately begin to incline. It's much more complicated than they at first thought. They thought once they reduced the viral load in the blood and so forth to zero, that the person, well, oh, we cured it. They don't have AIDS anymore. Yeah, they're not showing any symptoms. There's no viral load present. Okay, we're going to take them off these antiretrovirals and see what happens. And then, of course, the AIDS comes back. It turns out, I think it's the liver or some other organ that it actually sort of hides in a dormant state in, unaffected by the actual antiretrovirals. So it's still incurable. To say that a person doesn't have a right, if someone infects them purposely with an incurable disease, whether or not it is particularly deadly because they have access to those drugs, to deny that person justice, I think, is totally, totally wrong. Especially when there is still a stigma. You may not like this, you may think it's immoral, oh, my feelings. There is still a stigma associated, naturally, with having this incurable sexually transmitted disease. You can't really blame people for being concerned about getting AIDS because it simply makes sense to be concerned about that fact. So I'm not sure what the hell they're trying to do. Are they trying to cause more people to get AIDS in California? Because I would think that that's what's going to happen. This isn't going to reduce stigma. If anything, what would end up happening is people would be even more reluctant to have any sexual contact at all within the state of California because they know, yeah, oh, well, someone purposely or negligently gives me HIV, well, there's no recourse anymore for it, so I'd better avoid this state like the plague. Now, sensible individuals, I think, already avoid California like the plague. At any given time, a 10.0 could pop off on the San Andreas Fault and crack half of the state off into the ocean. You've got high crime rates. You've got high taxes. You're not getting that much in return. They've got constant climactic problems. First, they have a mega drought. And everyone's like, oh, I can't even have that glass of water. I can't afford it. I've got to pay my rent. And then the next year, all of a sudden, everything's flooded and there's too much water and dams start to break. Why would you want to live in the state of California? There's a reason so many people are leaving California for greener pastures in Texas and places like that. So, this is screwy. This is nuts. It's not going to help people with AIDS. How is it going to help them? How is it going to help somebody who has HIV other than, oh, well, if they have unprotected sex, like a dumbass, knowing they have this incurable transmissible disease, oh, we're not going to worry too much. We'll just slap them on the wrist, basically. It's a terrible precedent to set. What about victims' rights? They're not the victim in that arrangement. If they're doing it knowingly or they're negligent and they should know and they don't because they're too much of a dumbass to know, then they're the perpetrator there. They're not the victim. Oh, my stigma. They've got AIDS, therefore they're stigmatized. It doesn't matter. The other person now has AIDS too, and you're denying them justice. You're saying that the state of California is okay with a person who knowingly transmits a disease to another individual that cannot currently be cured. Now, if we had a down pat cure for AIDS that we could mass deploy and get rid of it forever, then I wouldn't care because it'd be like, well, it's not incurable anymore. It's not a problem. But we don't know that we can cure it with these antiretrovirals. They put people on these medicines till their viral load is 0. They keep going for months and months and months. They take them off, and immediately they've got presence of AIDS again because they haven't figured out how to kill it off. And they may never figure it out. Could be 100 years from now, it's still around quite easily. That's problematic. It doesn't make any sense. What exactly does this solve? There's no actual problem. I would think people in California should demand justice for those who are knowingly infected with a transmissible and incurable disease. If you think that the stigma of HIV makes that person the victim in that situation, then I think you need to check your morality out a little bit. That's about all.